Well, I'm here with Matt Forbeck, who is an American writer from Wisconsin. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Ah, fantastic. Now, Matt has had just an incredible career. I mean, I'm just, well, it's going to take a long time to read through all his credits, but a very brief overview. He's worked for Wizard of the Coast, Games Workshop, TSR, White Wolf, Pinnacle, Green Ronin. He's won various awards for Deadlands, Lord of the Rings role-playing game, Warzone. There's loads here. Independence Day. But you've also written role-playing games, Mutant Chronicles, Brave New World, Tales from the Loop. So is that additional writing I've got on there?
Sure.
Card games, the Blood Bowl series, Guild Wars series, the Knights of the Silver Dragon series, the Eberron series. Is that correct? Yep. The Endless Quest series, which is very interesting. We'll definitely be asking about that. Magic the Gathering comics, and various novels, and other things. Does that? Am I missing?
Yeah, it gets tiring, right? No, I've done lots of things. It's I've done toy design and interactive toys and video games, and I helped write an app for an interactive installation at the Milwaukee Public Library once, where you wandered around and it would detect which way you went by Bluetooth beacons. Wow. And did interactive fiction that way. All sorts of different things. Mostly it's just because I don't like to work for other people, and I've been at this for 30 years now, so it tends to add up, right? It sounds impressive, but I often tell people, if you got yourself something you could sit on a shelf every time you did something for 30 years, eventually you'd have a full bookshelf, right? I've got 2 full bookshelves over there right now, full of stuff that I've worked on. And again, it's just one of the neat things about working in publishing or in entertainment is that you get a souvenir every time you accomplish something, right?
It's a legacy you're leaving, really, isn't it? Are your kids kind of into it as well? Are they kind of proud of their dad?
Yeah. Well, so I don't know about proud of my we enjoy spending time together. They're all good kids. My eldest is actually following in my footsteps. He graduated from the University of Wisconsin last May, and he's been helping me out by writing some stuff for a setting I have called Shotguns and Sorcery that we're going to be doing a 5th edition version, a source book for, hopefully on Kickstarter later this year, maybe even in September starting. And then my son Patrick is actually studying video game design at UW Stout up in Menominee, Wisconsin. And my other kids are doing various things. One is doing a reader corps where he's a volunteer teaching kids how to read. My NB child, Helen, is studying anthropology at Beloit College, and Kenny is my last son out of all that is studying environmental studies at UW-Madison. So they're all over the place. And actually, it's kind of a crazy story, but 4 of them are quadruplets, right? So the oldest one is 22, and then the rest of them are 19. Wow. And the 19-year-olds were all trying to send off to college here in the next couple of weeks. Or at least 3 of them off to college in the next couple of weeks, and it's getting kind of nuts. It's just
that's fantastic. Well, I'm going to take you back to their age and when you were going to college and sort of into gaming and how that sort of came about. I take it you played D&D when you were younger.
Yes. No, I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. I had a friend of mine across the street picked it up when I was, I think, 12 or 13 years old. His mother bought it for him at Kmart as a Christmas present. It was on what they called the blue light special, which was a light that went woo woo woo, come here and get all your cheap stuff. And she found this copy of Dungeons and Dragons. It was I think the blue box is what's known nowadays as. And we just kind of ignored it for months. And then one summer day, they invited me over to play, and we ended up playing every day that summer. And I've been kind of hooked ever since. So that was 1980, 1981, I think. I actually have an autograph from Gary Gygax from a convention I met him at in 1982. So I've been at this for quite a while. I had the benefit of growing up in southern Wisconsin, which is actually where Dungeons and Dragons started. Started in a little town called Lake Geneva, which is about a 40-minute drive from where I am. And because of that, I was able to go to a lot of conventions growing up, like Winter Fantasy and Gen Con and a lot of these different ones. And I also ended up playtesting games for people in the evening. So there was a group of people who founded a company called Pace Setter Games, which was, they did Chill and Sandman and Wabbit's Revenge and whatever, all these great games. And I would go up there and play test games for them in the evenings after soccer practice, right? So I'd play soccer at high school, and I'd drive up there and play games with them. And these guys ended up kind of mentoring me into the whole industry as far as becoming a professional. And it's just been a hell of a career since. I've enjoyed it.
So, I mean, for what I read, you as soon as you left university, you went straight into the games industry.
Yeah, well, that was kind of a fluke. I mean, that's pretty much how the career goes. I mean, I started out, I had worked as a sales associate for a guy named Will Niebling when I was in college. And Will was the first sales manager for TSR, first vice president of sales for TSR way back in the day. And then when he got kicked out of the company, which they often did with people, he started up a company that was working for Grenadier Models and for Iron Crown Enterprises and Mayfair Games. And I would then go to conventions and help them out with this. So I was kind of doing this stuff as I was going through college. And then when I graduated, I wanted to go to Europe and I didn't have any money. So I got myself a student work visa. I wanted to visit. Well, I only knew one kid in the entire hemisphere. This guy I went to high school with was in Spain, and they didn't have a visa program for that. So I got the visa to the closest country of which I spoke the language, which happened to be the UK. And I showed up on a Wednesday, and with $600 in my pocket on a one-way ticket my father bought me for graduation from college, and called up Games Workshop on the phone, which you had to plug in coins in those days, and said, "Hey, I'm here in the country. I understand you're looking for people for your editorial stuff, and I've got a visa." And they invited me up, and stunningly enough, I discovered years later I was competing against two other people, and I landed the job, and ended up working there for 6 months. I worked on Blood Bowl. I worked on two expansions for Space Hulk called Gene Stealer and Deathwing, which were fantastic fun. I ended up living with a guy named William King, who's now a best-selling author and has done all sorts of great stuff, including World of Warcraft novels and many other books. At the end of 6 months, they said, "Come on back or stay here permanently." Right? Here's a permanent full-time job. We'll get your immigration papers sorted out. I'm like, "Ooh, that sounds like fun." Except my girlfriend back home in Ann Arbor, Michigan said, 6 months was one thing, but forever is an entirely other thing, or however long it's going to take me to finish my degree still. And I was like, okay, I could probably find another job. So I went back home to Ann Arbor to be with her. And we had a great send-off party and all that. Really, I'm still great friends with a lot of people at Workshop. But that's now my wife of 29 years and the mother of my 5 children. So
fantastic. Well,
I think I made the right choice there.
Absolutely. I was afraid to ask, but thank goodness that paid off.
Worked out well.
So when you went back home, obviously you worked in Games Workshop. Was that well known in America? Did Games Workshop sort of carry?
Oh, yeah. No, Games Workshop was pretty big. They weren't quite as big as they are now, but of course, Games Workshop has grown by leaps and bounds over the last couple decades. They were still pretty big. They mostly for Citadel miniatures, right, and for Warhammer. Not as much for a lot of the other stuff, but they were fantastically big for that. I had played Blood Bowl. I had played Space Hulk. Actually, I don't know if I had played Space Hulk at that point because it was fairly recently out, but I had played Warhammer and things like that. It wasn't quite as amazingly devoted of a following as they had in the UK, where it seemed like every city had its own Games Workshop store in it, right? But
more or less still does. I think that
exactly.
Right. Very well.
They've tried doing that here, where they tried to put stores in every city, but America's a much bigger place, and it's just kind of as much as they bonked their heads against it over the years, never been quite able to pull it off. But still very popular here, and always has been. And some of my great friends I still know from those days and still work with. The way I got into doing novels, one of the ways I got into doing novels was a guy named Mark Gascon, who was had been fired from Workshop when I was there and kept coming back to the company. He ended up starting something called the Black Library, which was the fiction division of Games Workshop. And I wrote 4 Blood Bowl novels for him over there. And then he ended up going off and forming another company called the Angry Robot, which was a small science fiction publisher. And they published 3 of my original novels as well. Oh. And now Marco is working, he's running Aconite Books, which is the fiction division of Asdame, or Fantasy Flight as it's often known in this country. So he's still doing lots of stuff. They're doing Marvel tie-in novels and all sorts of other games.
Yeah. So when you went home, what was the company you started working for? I mean, I noticed you worked for Wizards of the Coast and did things Gary Gygax. Was that
when I first got back, I started working for actually just freelance. I freelanced for Games Workshop. I worked on the Blood Bowl Companion. I ended up working for Iron Crown Enterprises on a book called Western Hero, which was the first big thing I'd done on my own. I had a game design partner named Brian Winter, who now runs a game store in Madison, Wisconsin. We did a bunch of stuff together for Target Games out of Sweden, and also for Grenadier Models. And we did all sorts of different things. I mean, I wrote painting guides. I edited the Grenadier Bulletin, which was their newsletter, for a year or two. I was the line developer for something called Silent Death, which was a ship-to-ship combat game with little miniatures in science fiction world. For Iron Crown, all sorts of different things. Eventually, I started getting into doing fiction and nonfiction. I do like Marvel encyclopedias and video game writing as well, and toy design, and sometimes get into as well. So.
Is that quite unusual, spreading yourself over so many sort of different genres and gaming genres?
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of unusual that you do this at all in the first place, right? So, I mean, there aren't a whole lot of people you can look and say, yeah, this guy's got an identical career to mine, and it's less of a career, more of a series of things that you accidentally stumbled into, right? And so what happens is somebody recommends you for something. The way I got into doing toy design, for instance, was I was doing I developed a collectible card game for a company called Artbox. I did a Monster Rancher collectible card game back in the early 90s. And I had done another collectible card game I worked on for Wildstorm, which was Jim Lee's division of Image Comics, back before he joined DC Comics, and he was a big Marvel artist before that. And so these guys at Artbox with the Marvel or the Monster Rancher stuff had a license to do that. But they also wanted to partner up with the people who did the toys over at Playmates Toys. They did these little Monster Rancher toys. And 5 years later, out of the blue, I get a phone call from the guys at Playmates Toys saying, we got this great game we don't know what to do with. It's got these dice that pop open and you're supposed to put figures in them and you roll the dice. And you're the only game designer we know. And I'm like, great. So I ended up doing a bunch of work with them over the years. I designed a game called Marvel Battle Dice for them that had television commercials and all sorts of wacky stuff. And then I ended up doing interactive toys for them. I did an interactive Star Trek role play kit for the 2009 movie, the first J.J. Abrams movie, where they had this thing where you have a belt and you get a communicator and a phaser. And the funny part was that neither the communicator or the phaser made any noise. It was all in the belt. So you would, but there was a magnetic switch in it. You would wave the communicator over the belt and it would activate the speaker in the belt. The same with the phaser. And they're like, well, we want to have this thing where it talks to the kids and tells them to go out and do various things, for like a role play thing. I'm like, okay. And they're like, well, you have 90 seconds worth of sound. I'm like, oh man, that's going to be interesting. And I said, well, can I program a random adventure generator into that? Would you let me do that? And they're like, can you explain to us what that is? And so I did. And they're like, yeah, sure, go ahead. So I ended up doing this thing where there was like eight different ending and starting points. So 4 for Kirk and 4 for Spock. And those would all be fixed. So if you got point A, you would then get, if you got starting point A, you would get finishing point A all the way through. But then it would pick 3 to 5 random mission complications from a list of 30. And so you got this thing that would generate unusual adventures for kids, different every time theoretically, so that you wouldn't be listening to the same 90 seconds worth of sound, and you wouldn't want to murder your children after a few days in the same room with it. So I like to think, I tell everybody I saved a lot of children's lives in those days. That was really what I was after. So.
Do you have a sort of a mind of the audience that you like to write for? Do you enjoy writing for the younger crowd or yourself? Do you write for yourself?
Well, it really depends on the project, right? If I'm writing something that's specifically designed for middle grade stuff, for instance, I just did a Minecraft Dungeons novel that came out last year, I guess. That's obviously for that age group, right? So it's for middle grade kids who are, some of them are reluctant readers, whatever, but I try to challenge them and get them into things. Some of the stuff I write is more for adults. It's very dark. I've done writing on Ghost Recon, for instance, which is a video game series that's very ultra modern, past modern military warfare stuff where I can swear like a sailor and introduce more mature themes. So when I write, generally I like to write for myself, or maybe myself in my 20s, right? When I was a little bit younger, more idealistic, and had some, was more open to new ideas. So I still try to be open to new ideas, but I try to think of myself in that atavistic past where I'm that idealistic person that wish I could still be some days when I wake up in the morning, my bones are creaking. But generally speaking, I write for myself. I mean, I like to fill my head with ideas all day long, and I like to have conversations with people. And then writing is a way to explore some of these ideas. And
how many of those projects that we've talked about are your own, from beginning to end? You kind of come up with the whole concept, and so you've written it and you produce it yourself.
That's a good question. Most of the stuff I've done is what's called work for hire, which is owned by somebody else. Although I do have, I had 3 novels I published through Angry Robot. I have a dozen novels I published that I own on my own, which I did through some crazy project called 12 for 12, which is back in 2012. I decided to write a novel a month for the entire year. They were 50,000 word novels, so they were kind of short, and I broke them up into trilogies, and then ran a Kickstarter for each trilogy to fund that, so I could actually afford to write for the year. And I own every one of those. Those are 4 different properties. And I also own something called Shotguns and Sorcery, which is actually one of those that originally I had licensed out as a D20 or Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition supplement or source book or a line of source books to Mongoose Publishing in the UK. And then my wife got pregnant with the quad, so I ended up not doing it. And then I ended up writing short stories for it. And then this guy said, hey, I'd like to license that for a role-playing game. So we ended up doing that. And it's a Cypher system role-playing game, and we're going to be doing a Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition version of it later this year. And, I've got a superhero game I did back in the 90s, back when I was running a company called Pinnacle Entertainment Group, which did Deadlands and such. And the game was called Brave New World. And I ended up selling the rights to that to AEG, Alderac Entertainment Group, and then purchasing them back a couple of years ago. So I'm hoping to do a 2nd edition of that and roll with that too. So while I enjoy doing a lot of different what they call IP writing, intellectual property writing, I do own a number of the things I've done. And at one point, I actually swore off doing any more tie-in work, right? I'm like, oh, no, I'm making plenty of money. I'm having fun. I'm doing this. And then people come to me and say, would you like to write Halo novels? And I'm like, God, yeah, I'd like to write, would you like to write some Marvel stuff? Like, God, yeah, I'm a big fan of this stuff. Would you like to write the Endless Quest books for Dungeons & Dragons? And I'm fighting myself here. And the funny part is when I was a kid, I would have killed for any of those opportunities. That's probably part of it, right? Where I go and I go, oh, how could I turn that down? I can't. But on the other hand, then you have to make room for your own things, because when you're working for other people, you're basically building value for other people. It's good to also build value for yourself if you can manage it at the same time.
Yeah, quite right. Absolutely. Now, I'm going to, obviously, this is International Game Book Day. So we're going to talk about some of your game books that you've done. Probably the ones that are most well known is the Endless Quest series, which isn't, I think they came out originally about the same time as the Fighting Fantasy books.
Yeah, they were a little bit later than that. I think the Fighting Fantasy books came out first, and there are some other great ones that Steve Jackson did as well, that were, amazing stuff that I ended up growing up on. And then, TSR was the guys who originally published the Endless Quest books, and they were all often playing catch up, but they also had just started their novel writing department. And they're like, okay, if we're going to be doing Dragonlance and stuff, maybe we should be doing essentially choose your own adventure books, but for Dungeons and Dragons, because obviously we're interactive games. So that makes good sense. It was kind of the crossroads of the 2 different departments from them. And they had Rose Estes was the woman who started out. There were some Daniels actually doing interactive fiction nowadays as well. And she did a great series of books. A lot of my friends from TSR back in the day also have done a number of books in that line. And then it fell apart. It just stopped. Sales apparently trailed off, or maybe it was because TSR went bankrupt in the late 90s. And then ended up being sold to Wizards of the Coast, which got sold to Hasbro, which is why Hasbro now owns everything, all that kind of stuff. But I had ended up doing a book for a company called Studio Press, which is part of Kings Road Publishing in the UK. And that was called Dungeonology. So if you've ever seen any of the ology books, which are like spyology and all these dragonology and whatever, this was a series of best-selling books. I can't remember the author's name, but he did 12 of these that were these beautiful you open them up, they got pop-ups and, different types of material in them and jewels and all sorts of great things. Again, for reluctant young readers, they're like, this is just snazzy, cool, shiny stuff.
Yeah.
And this guys at Kings Road had licensed the Ology stuff and licensed Dungeons and Dragons. And they asked me to write the Dungeons and Dragons version of an Ology book. So we wrote a book called Dungeonology, which did pretty well. It was set in the Forgotten Realms, which is the main world for Dungeons and Dragons, and had this big pop-up fold-out map and all sorts of other really cool stuff in it. And I got a kick out of writing. So they did well enough with that they turned to Wizards and said, hey, do you have anything else we could do? And apparently they well, you could do these Endless Quest books. So I did 4 of those in 1 year, and I did another couple the year after that, and then they kind of trailed off after that. But I had a ball writing them. There were a number of challenges in doing them, obviously, and maybe because of these particular situations, they're even more challenging, but I had a lot of fun working on them. The whole point of doing a book like that is to make it entertaining even when you fail, because you're probably going to fail like 75% of the time, right? Or higher as you go through the book. So, and then you go, oh, and then you bookmark back where you were, and you go back and you figure out the right way to get through it. But you want to make the failures just as entertaining and fun as the successes. Right.
And they're written a little bit different to, I think we have a lot of fighting fantasy and Lone Wolf people who'll be watching this, based in the UK mainly. But the Endless Quests, they were slightly different because they were kind of mixed in with novelizations as well. When they had characters and they had backgrounds and they had that and less dice rolling. Is that right?
No, there was no dice rolling in any of these. I think they did an advanced Endless Quest back in the early 90s that may have had some dice rolling in it, but I forget. But the original ones, the ones that I did, had no dice rolling at all. It was like, go to this page. Here's a decision. If you want to go this way, you go to this page. If you want to go that way, you go to that page. Yeah. So very much like the choose your own adventure type stuff, right? D&D was always like, well, if you want to actually play D&D and roll some dice, we have a game for you. It's right here, But they weren't interested in doing like game books like Fighting Fantasy, where you keep track of everything and all that. They did do solo adventures for Dungeons and Dragons rarely too, where you could sit down and play through an entire adventure on your own, but they weren't marketed as books so much as modules or adventures for Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. Fantastic. And was it the only game books you did? Did you do any others?
Well, no, let's see. I don't think I did any of those for Wizards of the Coast or for TSR. I did a bunch. Yeah, if you're talking about books for games, I've done dozens of those, obviously, right? Yeah. But if you're talking about interactive fiction, I think the only ones I've really done have been the Endless Quest books. And like I mentioned at one point, I did an interactive fiction adventure for the Milwaukee Public Library here, where it was really kind of interesting, where you'll get an app for your phone. And I don't even have this on my website. I don't know how many people even know I was involved with this thing, but you had an app on your phone, and it would read Bluetooth beacons, and it would it was an audio app. So it'd say, okay, Houdini has lost his paycheck and you need to go find it. And so you had to wander through this part of the museum that was a recreation of the streets of Milwaukee from the 1850s. And you're like, okay, do you go this way or this way? And you literally had to walk one way or the other to make the choice. And then the Bluetooth beacon would detect which way you had gone and then say, okay, you've gone this way, you've reached this point, here's what's happening now, and then here's a new decision for you, right? And having to actually map this out over a physical space and have people plant the beacons right where we needed them and all that, it was just really amazing, right? Awesome. I got to work with the director of the museum and the guy who was in charge of all the exhibits and everything else. And it was a lot of fun. And interactive fiction in a way that you don't normally get to do, right? So that was really a ton of fun for me as well.
So your process of writing one of the Endless Quest books, did you have your entire study covered in sort of maps and post-it notes and all those kind of things? Or one of the funny things is when I first started writing books, it was like, yeah, just come up with an idea, go, right? And I'm like, okay, great. Here's 4 titles. Here's what we're going to do. And then I was about halfway through the first book, they're like, actually, we want you to do them based upon stuff we've already written, right? Adventures that we've already done for 5th edition. I'm like, well, and they paid me for the work I did, so I didn't feel bad about that. But I'm like, okay. So after that, it was basically taking a Dungeons and Dragons adventure, one of the big, thick hardcover books they have nowadays, and picking a section of it, because you couldn't do the whole thing because they were way too long, and saying, okay, we're going to do an interactive fiction part set in this portion of this dungeon or landscape or whatever it happened to be. And the benefit of that actually was I had maps.
I had characters, I had monsters to fight against. I had it all right there in front of me. So it was really a matter of figuring out how to fictionalize or dramatize what was already there. So in that sense, it became more like writing a movie or film or television novelization than it did coming up with original stuff for that, right? I mean, there was a lot of originality in it, a lot of creativity in it, but it wasn't me coming up with everything from whole cloth, right? A lot of this stuff was already there for me. And then I had to kind of riff off that and figure out where the decision points were and what the exciting parts were. And then again, dramatize it so it was entertaining to people as well.
Wow, that's great. And is that it for the end of this quest series? Has that finished now? Or
I think it has. I mean, if they ever asked me to come back, I'd be happy to. But I think that the sales numbers weren't quite as high as they wanted to be. Right. It was published by Candlewick here in the United States, and it was published by Studio Press over in the UK. And some of the other D&D books have done fantastically well. Like Jim Zub's got a great series of books he's done there, like a D&D for little ones, and the Art and Arcana, and the cookbook for Dungeons and Dragons that some friends of mine wrote last year hit the New York Times bestseller list. I was like, who'd have thunk, right? Now, more power to them. I'm like, holy cow, you guys managed to pull that off. It's amazing. And they're beautiful, gorgeous books too. The Art and Arcana book is particularly amazing. And certain Jim's books are fantastically entertaining too. But the interactive fiction books, for whatever reason, just didn't take off. I think part of it may be they were trying to put them in through Scholastic and never managed to pull it off, which would have been a perfect audience for them. But one of the things about being a writer is you don't know. You're going to step up and you're going to take your swing. And then it's not just you, it's also everybody at the publishing company and the marketing group and everything else. And if everything falls together really well, you might get a hit. And if it doesn't, you move on to the next thing. The Marvel Encyclopedia I wrote, the first one, spent like 6 months on the New York Times bestseller list, right? And if I could replicate that every time, I certainly would.
Well, I'm going to move on to your next Marvel project, because I see that.
Yeah, exactly.
In September. Is it September? Your multiverse?
Well, September is when I'm supposed to be done with the first draft of the book, but no. So, I'm working on the Marvel Multiverse tabletop role-playing game, which will be out, I think, in the spring is what we're talking, like March or April. It's a 104-page book, which is a preview. It's actually a playtest rule book for the actual full hardcover monster tome that'll be coming out a year after that. So the idea is to get this book out in front of lots and lots of players so that they have a chance to bang on it and playtest it and tell us how we screwed it up. Because one of the interesting things when you're doing games is that it's almost impossible to play test something, especially something as complex as a role-playing game or a collectible card game, within a small group of people, right? Within friends, whatever, even dozens of people, hundreds of people. There's too many ways to break things and too many different perspectives that can come at it. So it's the only way you can really play test a lot of this stuff is on the market. You have to actually put it out there and let people bang on, and then they'll tell you what an idiot you are in other ways. They'll tell you how great you are in other ways too. It's fantastic, but they'll say, but this part here, and you're like, oh yeah, I should have thought of it. And then you're like, okay, I can fix that. So the benefit of doing this is that it gives me time to actually put this out there, put out a preliminary version of the game, let people see what we're doing. It's only like a $10 purchase, right? It's a 104-page softcover book. It's comic book sized. So it's not like you're having to mortgage your family to get the book for anybody. And then you can say, oh, this is great. I love it. Or no. Or, the people will figure it out. And then I can take some of that feedback and say, okay, this here is a battle hardened version of the rules for the final version. And of course, no game is ever final, right? They say games don't actually get published. They just get torn out of the hands of the designer and put into the market, which is what happens eventually.
I think the interesting thing is, nowadays, I mean, I do print on demand as well, is that you can update things. You can kind of go, oh, hang on, that's a very good point. Let's add that back in or change that rule there. And then the next edition is all up there.
Exactly. I'm a big fan of print on demand. I mean, especially because the number of gaming companies, publishing companies I've seen mostly go under because of inventory management, right? Because it's so easy to overprint a series of books and then realize that, oh, these are not going to sell and I've lost every dime of profit I've made. It's all sitting in a warehouse and soon it's going to the recycling plant. And because it's just very hard to gauge demand for anything. Even when you have a hit, it's really hard to gauge demand. If you have something that goes really well, you're like, let's print like tons more. And then you're like, yeah, but they really only wanted what you printed the first time and maybe half of that. And now you just wasted all your money again. Print on demand's great. The profit per book isn't nearly as high, but the risk that it mitigates your risk to almost nothing. Yeah. Right.
Well, I think it's high.
Cover development costs. So.
It's high if you're like self-publishing. It's not high if you're a publisher.
No, exactly. Well, the trick is if you're a publisher, you're amortizing your costs along, dozens, if not hundreds of titles. Right. Mm-hmm. All your risks are amortized across that. The costs that you have for marketing and for warehousing and shipping and establishing all that stuff, it's across so many different titles that the risk becomes lower and lower. But if you're just self-publishing and doing a few titles, the risk for each one of those is crazy high, right? So I could lecture on that for an hour or two.
No, I totally agree. I'm totally sold on it now, and I'm adapting my own games into book versions. And the thing I found about it is that anyone can order it from anywhere in the world, and it will get to them really quickly. And again, no shipping, no.
Exactly.
It reduces costs for everyone. And I think the way the games industry is going, I think it's going to start going back to books, and I hope it does.
Well, honestly, right now, because of the global shipping crisis that we're going through, books are easier to ship than anywhere else, and they can be printed in a lot more places than a box game or a board game can be played.
Yeah.
Printed, right? People are like, well, why don't you just print stuff in the States nowadays instead of China, where most of the stuff is done for games? And I'm like, that would be great if we actually had printers in America and had gone out of business 20 years ago because of the Chinese market already. And it's impossible to just ramp that stuff up immediately. So sure, give us another couple of years, it might be back. But in the meantime, it's going to be a painful year for a lot of game developers.
Yeah, I think so. It's a shame. Rand, what are you working? Obviously, you're working on the Marvel thing at the moment because it's going to be out. But are there any other projects? Do you tend to work on 2 or 3 projects at the same time, or?
It seems like I prefer to work on one at a time, but I never get that chance, right? So currently I'm working on the Marvel game. I'm working on 2 different video games I can't tell you about at the moment because they have this thing called non-disclosure agreements. So you have to wait till somebody in marketing says, yes, we're ready to tell the world about that. Like I can barely tell you about the Marvel game, and it's only because somebody in marketing finally said, well, we need to put this into the queue for going through Amazon and all the other different booksellers. So we need to have it now, which means we need to announce it the week before that. And otherwise, we would just still be going, nope, we're not working on anything. I'm working on the Shotguns and Sorcery 5th edition thing. So if you go to shotgunsandsorcery.com, you can see it'll take you to a page that's got a lot of information on that. And we're about to put up something for a Kickstarter for that. Hopefully, will be coming out in September or maybe October. My son Marty has been doing a lot of writing on that, and I've been doing some editing and layout. One of the other things is when you start out doing this stuff, you wear so many different hats, right? So you're doing you're doing the art direction and the layout, the marketing and the shipping and everything else. And having run Pinnacle Entertainment Group for 4 years back when I was, in my early 30s, late 20s, that I have a lot of those skills. They've atrophied over the years, but it all comes together. What else am I working on? Lots of different things. Most of which I can't.
Is there like a personal project that you're kind of saying, I've still got this novel, or I've got this this role-playing system that it's there. I just need time to work on it, and you're just trying to find that space.
I have a novel I sold to Tor 9 years ago that I still have not written because I got sick, my dad got sick, my mom died, pandemic happened. You're like, life just gets in the way. And the people at Tor, and also my editor got fired for sexual harassment, and they moved me to another editor. Okay. And the new editor's like, well, when you get to it, I'm like, and she's like, and I know you didn't get a big advance, so you're going to probably have to get this to us when you can. And I'm dying to write this book, right? I just need about 2 months to just clear off everything and just chop off and just do it. But the rate I'm going, I don't know when the hell that's going to happen.
Can you give us
once my kids are in college and I got room in the house, I can do this kind of stuff.
Can you give us a little slight inkling of what it's about?
It was a book called Loot Drop, which was actually announced at one point. It's all about money laundering in virtual games, right? And so there's an adventure that's basically World of Warcraft crossed with No Country for Old Men. Right? So,
that sounds great. I hope you do that. And
yeah, me too. I'm dying to write it. So.
Is there anything that, apart from the Marvel, is there anything that's just come out, or anything that you kind of really want to tell the world about?
I really want to tell you all about it, but I can't. Marvel's very tight about security and about what they want people to know. The thing I can tell you is stuff that people like has been revealed, but quietly most people don't see it. Like people are like, what's the D616 system? Well, it's 3 6-sided dice, guys. It's not. People are like, is it a 6 and a 16-sided die? I'm like, no. Is it a 616-sided die? No, it's 3 dice rolled in a very funky way, which we'll tell you all about soon. So I'm very excited about that. We're planning a whole line for it. It's being published by Marvel as opposed to being published by a licensee. Right. A lot of times, Marvel, whoever would say, okay, we're going to license this to Green Ronin or to TSR or whoever, and those would be the people. Margaret Weiss did the last version, for instance. These will be the people that'll publish it. This time they said, we know people can do this. Strangely enough, the guy who hired me was John Nee, who was the guy who hired me to develop the Wildstorms collectible card game for Jim Lee back in 92 or 94 or whatever it was. So this is the kind of thing where just, you start with one guy, you get to know them, you do good work. And then when they need somebody, they call you up out of the blue and say, hey, Matt, would you be interested in that? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Let's see. I've been playing D&D for 30 years. I read a couple Marvel encyclopedias. Would I be interested in? Yeah, I do. I've got. Yeah. And again, it's like, should I write Loot Drop or should I work on the Marvel role-playing game? And man, it just kills me some days. But I want to do both. So I'm doing both as best I can.
Do you still have time at all? Doesn't sound like you have a lot of time in your hands to actually play games, to role play. And
yeah, actually I do. I don't do a whole lot of role playing games, except when I'm play testing stuff, which I do. But I don't have like a campaign set up. And some of my kids are like, Dad, we want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Dad, we want to. I'm like, well, but part of it is just getting everybody together. Even in a house when we have everybody here, it's hard to coordinate schedules and get everybody's mind space. But that is my gaming table.
I was going to say, very fine gaming table. That's gorgeous.
Exactly. So we hauled it out from the back wall. We put the lights around it. We play all sorts of different things on it. Anywhere from like speed solitaire and dice to Wingspan to whatever else. We play a lot of Munchkin. My friend John Kovalik was one of the editors or the artist on that, and then Andrew Hackard was a good buddy of mine. Was just passed away. He was the Munchkin czar for many years. Wow. And Andrew would take me and my kids every Gen Con on Sunday at noon. We would play Munchkin with Andrew for like 10 years, right? Wow. So yeah, we still play lots of games. I love playing games. If nothing else, it forces my kids and I to all look at each other for a few hours at a time, which I always enjoy, as opposed to like, doing something passive, like watching a video game or a movie or whatever else. We always go to Gen Con every year, which I'm planning still to do in September this year. Let's hope, COVID doesn't knock it out, but I'm still planning to go at the moment. And I just love these things. This is going to be my 40th Gen Con, I think. So wow. Very close to it.
Where do you see sort of gaming, those type of gaming going in the next few years, the next sort of 10 years?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be everybody playing the Marvel game, of course, right? So, no, it's going to be interesting. I think a lot of what we've learned over the last couple of years has been how to get together and do things with people, even if you're not in the same room with them, right? Like kind of like we're doing right now. I mean, a lot of times this would be something we would do as a panel at a convention, right? But now, because we've all been trained to do Zoom meetings for last year, we all know how to do this. It all works fine. We can then share this with people across the world, as opposed to the people who happen to be in the same locale or happen to be able to fly into a place for a weekend or whatever. And I think that's fantastic. And also, again, as far as scheduling things, if I don't have to fly across the country or even drive across town, I can just sit in front of my computer and get things going. I think that we're going to see a lot more games geared toward people who want to play games that way, right? Yeah. Both virtually and in real space.
I think that you've got the various websites where you can play the games virtually as well. I don't think that many of them support video, but I think that's the way they will go.
Exactly. There's a lot of people already pressing in that direction. It's going to be pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, as you mentioned earlier about Bluetooth and gamification in other places is happening. And
no, that's happening constantly. Just people have figured out that gaming is a way to get people hooked on things. So.
Yeah. And I think also
in a good way
with Netflix as well. They've done Bandersnatch and Gimme Smith with choosing.
Exactly.
I think possibly the maybe Marvel will bring out a choose your own movie.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, sign me up, kids. If anybody out there at Marble's hearing about that.
Well, you heard it here first. Matt's going to be doing it. Right. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. Now, if anyone wants to sort of follow you, obviously not in person, but if they want to follow you on social media or websites, is there anything you can tell them?
Sure. Go to forbeck.com, FORBECK.com. I have everything up there that you can want to know about what I'm doing, what I'm working on, that I'm allowed to tell you at the time. You can also find me on Twitter at mforbeck. You can find me on Instagram at mforbeck. You can find me on Facebook at Forbeck. Just stick my name in Google. You got it. You're all smart people.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us, and good luck with the next set of adventures.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ollie. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.